Thanksgiving dinner. Ethan, the older brother, throws his napkin on the table like a white flag of war. I'm done calling, done pretending we're family. Then he pulls out Mom's letter and reads the line out loud. Clara isn't even Dad's. Some stranger fucked and fled. Silence. Clara, the baby sister everyone used to ignore, shrinks so small the chair seems to swallow her. Tears hit the table before the words do. Ethan looks right at her. So tell me, little sister, when exactly were you planning to tell us you're the reason he left? The forks stop. The clock stops. Clara's mouth opens. And the first lie of the night is about to become the last thing this family ever shares. I didn't think she'd leave it like this. Clara's voice cracked the stillness in the living room, her words landing like stones in a dry well, heavy with unspoken grief. The faded floral wallpaper peeled at the edges, curling back as if the house itself recoiled from the weight of memory. Sunlight filtered through dust motes suspended in the thick air, casting long, oppressive shadows across the threadbare Persian rug their mother had prized. The scent of old books and liniment lingered, a ghostly trace of the woman who once filled this space with her quiet, unyielding commands. Ethan shifted in the armchair, its springs groaning under his weight like a weary sigh. He avoided Clara's gaze, focusing instead on the notary's briefcase clamped shut on the coffee table. Let's just get through it, he murmured, his tone even, practiced, a shield against the rising tide. Peace required surrender, and he had long mastered the art, nodding through arguments he never joined, smoothing edges until they dulled. But inside, resentment simmered, a low boil he dared not stir, lest it consume the fragile calm. Maya stood by the mantel, arms crossed tightly, her reflection fractured in the tarnished silver mirror. The childhood photos lined the shelf below, smiling faces, frozen in a time before the fractures widened, their joy now a hollow echo. She traced a finger along the edge of a frame, not quite touching the glass, her detachment a shield against the pull of this place. Escape had always been her refuge, late nights at the office, weekends vanishing into the city's indifferent sprawl. Yet here, the loneliness clawed deeper, an ache she buried under layers of self-sufficiency, cold and unrelenting. The notary, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and flipped open the folder. His voice droned like a distant train rumbling through fog, reciting the formalities with mechanical precision. To my children, Clara, Ethan, and Maya. I bequeath the family home and its contents, divided equally, with the provision that you convene here annually to honor our shared history. He paused, adjusting his tie, oblivious to the undercurrents rippling through the room like hidden currents in still water. Clara leaned forward, her hands twisting the hem of her blouse, the fabric bunching under needy fingers that trembled faintly. She needed them to see her, the one who had stayed closest, who had called weekly, even as the conversations thinned to hollow pleasantries. Annually? That's something, isn't it? Her eyes darted between her siblings, pleading for acknowledgement, a thread to pull them back from the edge. But the words twisted in her chest, laced with the old habit of exaggeration, of feigning more hurt than she felt to draw them in, a desperate bid against the void. Ethan's jaw worked silently, a muscle flickering beneath the skin like a suppressed storm. He wanted no part of this ritual, no annual dredging of the silt they'd let settle over years of silence. It's her wish, he said flatly, the passive edge sharpening just enough to deflect, to keep the peace at arm's length. Conflict loomed in every glance exchanged, every silence stretching longer than the last, heavy with the weight of avoided truths. He glanced at the clock, its tick echoing like a countdown to escape, relentless and unforgiving. Maya turned slightly, her voice cool, measured, a veneer over the turmoil beneath. Honor our history? What history? The one where we pretend everything's fine? Loneliness wrapped around her like the shawl draped over the piano, unused for years, its dust a testament to forgotten melodies. She craved distance, the freedom of solitary evenings, but the will's words bound her here, suffocating in the weight of obligation that pressed like damp earth. Her independence cracked just a fraction, revealing the void beneath, dark and yawning. The notary continued, parceling out minor bequests: a brooch to Clara, tools to Ethan, books to Maya. Each item a shard of their mother's life, now weapons in the quiet war of estrangement, sharp and unforgiving. Clara's breath hitched at the brooch's mention, her fingers itching to claim it as proof of favor, a tangible anchor in the drifting. Ethan nodded mechanically, his mind already plotting how to sell his share without a fight, detaching from the emotional snare. Maya stared at the floorboards, worn smooth by footsteps long faded, the unease coiling tighter in her gut like a serpent awakening. No one spoke as the notary gathered his papers. The room held its breath, the emotional chasm yawning wider, filled not with words but with the echoes of what they'd never said, reverberating in the stale air. Grief hung unspoken, resentments festering like wounds sealed too soon, infected and throbbing. They were bound here, in this house of ghosts, fracturing further with every avoided truth, the walls themselves seeming to lean in with oppressive judgment. Hours blurred into a heavy dusk, the living room's shadows deepening like unspoken accusations, swallowing the light inch by inch. Clara sank into the sagging armchair, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of a forgotten album, while her siblings paced the creaking floorboards. The weight of inheritance pressed down, stirring a quiet suspicion in the stale air, eyes meeting with guarded glances, trust fraying like the wallpaper's curls. As twilight seeped through the grimy windows, they turned to the stack of yellowed papers, the first page trembling slightly in Clara's hand. "Always so dramatic, even now," Ethan muttered, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the dust settling on the coffee table, thick and undisturbed. He flipped another page of the will, the paper crackling like brittle bones under his thumb, each sound a fracture in the quiet. The lawyer had left an hour ago, but the siblings lingered, trapped in the room's stale embrace, the scent of old varnish mingling with the faint, acrid tang of their mother's untouched perfume bottles on the mantel, a lingering specter. Maya shifted on the sagging couch, her legs drawn up, arms wrapped around her knees as if holding herself together against the unraveling. She stared at the faded rug, tracing the worn threads with her eyes, avoiding the document that now lay open between them like an open wound. Clara leaned forward, her breath quick and shallow, fingers hovering over the edge of the page Ethan held, tension humming in the air. "What do you mean, dramatic?" Clara's words sliced through, sharp with that familiar plea for validation, her voice echoing slightly off the walls. Her eyes darted between her siblings, wide and searching, as if their agreement might stitch her unraveling world back together, fragile thread by thread. Ethan sighed, folding the will with deliberate care, but his gaze lingered on a sealed envelope tucked inside the back cover. One their mother had hidden, the lawyer's note explained, for the right moment. He hesitated, the envelope's wax seal gleaming dully under the lamp's yellow glow, casting eerie flickers. "This." She left instructions. "Read it after the formalities." Maya's head snapped up, her detachment cracking just enough to reveal the flicker of unease beneath, a shadow crossing her features. "Just get it over with, Ethan. We're not kids anymore. We don't need her games," she said, her words laced with the weariness of old deceptions. He broke the seal with a soft rip, unfolding the letter slowly, as if delaying could preserve the fragile piece he'd clung to all afternoon, now slipping away. The handwriting looped across the page, their mother's script, elegant even in finality, a last whisper from the grave. Ethan cleared his throat and began reading aloud, his voice steady at first, then faltering into the oppressive quiet. "My dears, Ethan, Maya, Clara, if you're reading this, I've gone, and the truths I've carried alone must now surface. Ethan, your father wasn't the man you thought. He left before you were born, not for work, but because of what he saw in me, what I hid from him, and from you. Maya, You were never the accident I claimed. You were planned, but with someone else's shadow over us. And Clara, my youngest, the one I held closest. Your birth came from a night I regret, with a man who wasn't your father, but one who walked away when the family needed him most. The words hung, unfinished in the air, as Ethan trailed off, the silence crashing in thicker than before, broken only by the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, relentless as a heartbeat. Maya's face paled, her arms tightening around her legs until her knuckles blanched white against the fabric. Planned? With whose shadow? She glanced at Ethan, suspicion coiling in her chest like smoke. Had he known? Buried it to keep his precious peace? A secret festering in the dark. Clara's breath hitched, a small gasp that demanded attention, piercing the gloom. What does that even mean? She lied to all of us? Her voice trembled, but her eyes narrowed on Maya. Then Ethan, probing for weakness, for the crack she could widen to pull them closer, her need a palpable force. You both look like you suspected something. All those years, whispering behind my back? Ethan set the letter down, his hands steady, but his jaw unyielding beneath the passive mask, a fortress against the storm. I didn't know. None of us did. Yet the words tasted false, even to him. The way Maya now avoided his gaze, the subtle hunch in her shoulders. It stirred his own doubt, a whisper of betrayal in the shadows. Had she escaped more than just obligations? What secrets had she carried away with her independence, hidden in the folds of her solitude? Maya pushed to her feet, the couch springs groaning in protest, a mournful sound in the heavy air. This changes nothing. Or everything. Her voice was flat, but inside, loneliness gnawed deeper, laced now with the sting of betrayal, sharp as broken glass. Were they strangers, bound by lies their mother wove like a shroud? She backed toward the mantel, her fingers brushing a cold perfume bottle, its glass slick under her touch, evoking a chill that seeped into her bones. Clara reached for the letter, snatching it before Ethan could stop her, her needy grasp turning possessive, fingers curling like claws. We need to talk about this. Really talk. But her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, flicked between them like accusations, manipulating the fracture into a chasm, deepening the divide. The room pressed in, walls echoing the unspoken suspicions blooming between them, each sibling a silhouette against the other's hidden truths, alone in the oppressive quiet that smothered like fog. As the afternoon bled into dusk, the siblings drifted from the suffocating parlor, the will's revelations coiling like smoke in their minds, insidious and persistent. Isolation thickened the air, a melancholic fog that amplified the creak of floorboards and the distant tick of a forsaken clock, marking time's inexorable march. Fear stirred in the hollows of their chests, loneliness etching deeper lines into the family's fractured silhouette, urging one shadowed figure toward a fragile bid for reunion. Why are we even still here? Clara's voice sliced through the quiet, sharp as a splinter under skin, her eyes darting between the faded velvet curtains and her siblings' averted faces, searching for a spark in the dimness. The words hung, unanswered at first, in the parlor's thickening hush, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Dust motes swirled lazily in the slanted light from the single bulb overhead, catching on the edges of the oak sideboard where forgotten teacups sat, their rims stained with rings of neglect, echoes of mornings long past. Maya shifted on the sagging armchair, her fingers tracing the frayed armrest, feeling the coarse threads snag against her skin like tiny accusations, pulling at her resolve. She wanted out, away from this house that smelled of mothballs and regret, from the invisible threads pulling her back into the family's unraveling web. But leaving now would mean admitting the loneliness that gnawed at her core. A shadow she dressed in practiced indifference, cold and unyielding. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound wet and reluctant, like gravel under tires crunching in the quiet. He set the will down on the coffee table with deliberate care, the paper's edges curling inward as if shrinking from the room's weight, oppressive and unescapable. As the eldest, He'd always been the one to patch cracks before they split wide, but today the effort felt like pushing against a tide of silt, heavy and suffocating. "We should do something," he said, his gaze fixed on the floorboards, scarred from years of pacing feet that echoed unspoken tensions. "A family dinner. Tonight. Cook up whatever's in the fridge. Sit down together. Talk about this. About us." His voice aimed for steady, but it wavered, betraying the fear coiling in his gut. The dread of words that might erupt, shattering the fragile peace he'd guarded like a brittle eggshell, now cracking under pressure. Clara leaned forward, her chair creaking under the sudden movement, nails digging into her palms until crescents bloomed white against the skin. She needed this, craved the nod of recognition, the shared glance that said she mattered in the dim light. But beneath it lurked the terror of being sidelined again, of fading into the wallpaper while they drifted further apart into shadows. "Dinner? Really, Ethan? Like that fixes anything?" Her laugh came out forced, brittle, laced with the undercurrent of manipulation she wielded like a half-sharpened knife, probing for a reaction, any spark to draw them in. Yet her chest tightened, fear whispering that her plea would scatter them like leaves in an unseen wind, leaving her alone in the gathering dusk. Maya's breath caught, a shallow hitch she masked by crossing her legs, the wool of her skirt brushing cool against her calves, a fleeting comfort. Escape tugged at her, urgent as a pulse, but the proposal pinned her in place, stirring the suffocating dread of obligations that bound tighter than chains, cold iron around her heart. What if talking unearthed the voids they'd all pretended weren't there, dark and bottomless? The silence stretched, contemplative and cruel, each second amplifying the chasm between them. The unspoken resentments, the years of sidestepped truths hanging like fog. The air carried the faint tang of varnish, now mingled with the metallic edge of anxiety, pressing down like an uninvited hand on their shoulders, unrelenting. Ethan's eyes flicked up briefly, meeting Clara's, then Maya's, before dropping again to the shadows. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just us, before we all walk away for good." His words trailed into the oppressive quiet, the proposal a fragile bridge over the fracture widening beneath, trembling under the weight. Fear flickered in the room's dim corners, not of the dinner itself, but of what it might force them to face, the isolation they'd cultivated, now staring back with hollow eyes that reflected their own. Clara bit her lip, tasting salt, while Maya stared at her hands, wondering if the loneliness would swallow her whole if she stayed, or if it already had, an inescapable tide. The parlor's silence stretched into twilight, the siblings drifting toward the dining room like ghosts drawn by habit, their footsteps muffled on the worn floors. Faded portraits on the walls whispered of bygone gatherings, their eyes hollow with the ache of shared solitude, watching from the gloom. As plates were set and chairs scraped against worn floors, the air grew heavier, laced with the faint, mocking aroma of home, stirring embers of old resentments beneath a veil of nostalgic haze, thick and disorienting. Ethan scraped his fork across the porcelain plate, the metallic screech slicing the dim dining room like a confession too long buried, raw and echoing. Steam rose from the half-eaten roast, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of overcooked potatoes that no one had bothered to salvage, the scent turning cloying in the still air. Clara's eyes, wide and pleading beneath the chandelier's jaundiced glow, fixed on him, her question from the parlor still echoing in the spaces between their breaths, unanswered and insistent. "You always do this," Clara whispered, her voice threading through the clink of Maya's spoon against her bowl, a fragile rhythm in the tension. She leaned forward, knuckles whitening around her napkin, twisting it into a rope of fabric that strained against her grip. "Pretend everything's fine. Like we're kids again, playing at family dinners while Dad's ghost haunts the silverware," she said, the words laced with melancholic bitterness. Ethan's gaze dropped to the tablecloth, stained faintly from spills of yesteryears, red wine from that Christmas when laughter had still come easy, before the inheritance fights and the silences stretched like shadows at dusk, long and encroaching. He wanted to smooth it over, to murmur something placating, but the words curdled in his throat, sour with resentment. "Clara, not now. Can't we just eat?" he replied, his voice a low murmur, avoidance woven into every syllable. Maya exhaled sharply, setting her glass down with a deliberate thud that sent ripples through the amber liquid, disturbing the calm surface. Her fingers lingered on the stem, tracing the etched pattern that mimicked the lace curtains in their childhood home, now frayed and forgotten in storage, a relic of lost warmth. She had come back for this, hadn't she? The pull of obligation, the invisible tether yanking her from her solitary apartment across the city, relentless. But the room pressed in, the walls paneled in dark oak absorbing every sigh, every unspoken regret, like a confessional that offered no absolution. Eat what? Memories? Because that's all this is. Her tone detached, like fog drifting over a still lake, yet beneath it lurked the ache of nights alone, replaying the echo of their mother's songs from holidays long faded, distant and mournful. Clara's laugh cracked, brittle as autumn leaves underfoot, scattering in the wind. She jabbed a finger toward Maya, the motion pulling at the loose thread on her sleeve, a remnant of the sweater their grandmother had knit, now unraveling like their bonds, thread by fragile thread. "Oh, perfect. The wanderer speaks. You left us, Maya, bolted the second you could, chasing your freedom, while Ethan and I rotted here, picking up the pieces. Remember the summers by the lake? We promised we'd always—" Her voice fractured, needy edges sharpening into accusation, manipulating the pull of those golden days to reel them closer, to make them see her in the dim light, desperate for validation. Ethan shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, a sound that recalled the porch swing where they'd whispered secrets as teens, now rusted and silent. He hated this, the unraveling, the way peace slipped through his fingers like sand, grain by grain. But avoidance had its teeth. They sank in now, drawing blood. And you, Clara? Always the victim, tugging at heartstrings like puppet strings. You think jealousy fixes anything? I stayed because someone had to. Not for glory, but because— His words trailed, passive barbs laced with the resentment he'd buried under forced smiles, now surfacing like bile. Maya's eyes narrowed, the loneliness she masked cracking open like a door left ajar, creaking in the draft. The roast's savory scent soured in her nostrils, evoking picnics where arguments dissolved into shared silence, hands linked against the chill of evening. Because what, Ethan? Because you're the martyr? We were a family once, lazy afternoons, fireflies in jars, promises etched in the dirt. Now it's just this. She gestured at the table, platters cooling untouched, the weight of years pressing down, nostalgic warmth twisting into a blade that cut deep. Clara recoiled, tears welling, her drive to be seen flaring into desperation, hot and blinding. You both hate me for it, don't you? For needing you. The air thickened with their breaths, accusations whispering like wind through cracked windows. The dinner devolving into a tapestry of old jealousies. Ethan's sidelong glances at Maya's independence, Maya's envy of Clara's unyielding cling, Clara's bitterness at their drifts. Nostalgia bloomed amid the barbs, a melancholic fog veiling the ruins of what they'd lost, leaving only the oppressive hush of truths too late unearthed, echoing in the shadows. The clatter of silverware faded into a heavy silence, the dining room's shadows lengthening as the family dispersed like ghosts fleeing dawn, their footsteps fading into the gloom. Hours bled into the small hours, Lily alone in her childhood bedroom, the walls pressing in with memories too thick to breathe, suffocating like velvet. Regret coiled in her chest, a cold serpent, whispering of chains unbroken, unyielding. In the dim glow of a single lamp, her gaze drifted to the faded wallpaper, and desperation bloomed. The house, this tomb of yesterdays, had to go. A prison of faded echoes. The words spilled from Lily's lips like ink bleeding through paper, staining the silence before anyone could catch them, dark and irreversible. "I'm selling the house," she said, her voice a brittle thread unraveling in the dim light of the chandelier, flickering like a dying flame. The roast congealed untouched on her plate, its gravy pooling in greasy rivulets that mirrored the slow seep of regret into the room's marrow, cold and viscous. Ethan's gaze fixed on the fork's tines, embedded now in the tablecloth where it had fallen, a small violence. He wanted to smooth this over, to cradle the fragile piece like a dying ember. But the words clawed at him, exposing the rot beneath his careful silences, festering. "Lily," he murmured, the name a plea wrapped in hesitation, heavy with unspoken pleas. His fingers curled around the stem of his water glass, not gripping, just holding. Anything to anchor against the tide of confrontation he dreaded, waves crashing inward. Yet inside, resentment flickered. How many times had he swallowed his own grievances to keep this roof over them, only for her to dismantle it now, brick by crumbling brick? Maya leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking under her like a confession she refused to voice, protesting the weight. She traced the rim of her plate with a thumbnail, the faint scrape echoing her detachment, a wall built high against the family's suffocating pull, unbreachable, yet cracking. Escape. That was her pulse, steady and unyielding. But Lily's declaration twisted it into something sharper, a loneliness that echoed in her chest like an empty hall, vast and hollow. "You've thought this through?" she asked, her tone flat, laced with the shadow of her own hidden ache, a whisper in the dark. No accusation outright, but the question lingered, heavy with the disappointment of bonds fraying before she could sever them first, threads snapping one by one. Clara's breath hitched, a small, needy sound that cut through the steam still curling from the potatoes, ghostly wisps. Her eyes darted from face to face, wide with the terror of invisibility, her drive to be seen twisting into a desperate bid for center stage, frantic. "But this is all we have left," she whispered, leaning forward, her sleeve brushing the edge of the table and toppling a salt shaker. Grains scattered like forgotten tears across the cloth. She reached for Lily's hand, a manipulative tether disguised as affection, pulling attention toward herself with insistent force. "Remember the summers here? The way Dad used to—" Her voice cracked, not from memory alone, but from the fear that without this house, she'd dissolve into nothing, unloved and unseen, fading into the ether. Lily pulled her hand away, the rejection a quiet detonation, rippling through the air. Desperation had driven her here, to this table scarred by years of muted arguments, her need to flee the ghosts of their shared past, overriding the fragility of the moment, a final break. The house loomed in her mind, not walls and beams, but the weight of illnesses unspoken, betrayals buried under polite nods, heavy as lead. Selling it meant air, freedom from the oppression that clung like damp rot to every corner, insidious and pervasive. Yet as her siblings' faces turned toward her, Ethan's averted eyes, Maya's cool distance, Clara's pleading grasp, regret bloomed, insidious and cold, a frost settling in. What had she unleashed? The family, already a fragile weave, unraveled further in the hush that followed, threads drifting apart. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound ragged, scraping against the silence. "We could talk about it, not rush." But his words rang hollow, passive-aggressive barbs hidden in the offer, his fear of upheaval manifesting as this feeble bridge, trembling. Maya said nothing, her silence a deeper cut, loneliness wrapping around her like the chill seeping from the uncurtained windows, icy fingers. Clara whimpered softly, "Don't leave us like this," her manipulation fraying into genuine plea, raw and exposed. The clock ticked onward, each second amplifying the tension, accusations unspoken, yet palpable in the air's thickening weight, like smoke from a hidden fire. Regret settled over them all, a melancholic shroud, as the home that had bound their fractures now threatened to bury them beneath its weight. Lily stared at her plate, the food cold and accusing, wondering if escape was just another cage, gilded but confining. Hours blurred into a suffocating veil after Lily's words, the dining room emptying like a deflated lung under the chandelier's indifferent glow, light pooling coldly. Mark retreated to the shadowed corners of the house, betrayal coiling in his gut like rusted wire. Each breath a labored echo of fractured trust, ragged. Loneliness seeped through the walls, melancholic and unyielding, as memories of their shared silences twisted into accusations, sharp whispers. In the oppressive hush of midnight, his mind turned inward, contemplating the abyss of chaos ahead, the first threads of severance weaving through his resolve, dark and inevitable. Ethan's fork clattered against the porcelain, shattering the fragile hush that had settled after Lily's words, a brittle break. Gravy splashed across the tablecloth in dark, irregular spots, like accusations flung too soon, staining the fabric. Maya flinched, her eyes lifting from the congealed mound on her plate, while Clara's hand hovered mid-reach for the salt, frozen in that needy pause she always adopted when tension spiked, air thickening. The chandelier above swayed faintly, casting fractured light across their faces. Elena's jaw set in a line that spoke of buried storms, though he said nothing yet, brooding. Maya pushed back her chair an inch, the scrape of wood on floor a deliberate retreat, her fingers curling into the napkin on her lap, as if to anchor herself against the pull of the room's suffocating gravity, heavy and unyielding. She wanted out, away from this table that trapped them like flies in amber, their family's history hardening around them, immutable. Clara broke first, her voice a thin whine threading through the air, piercing the gloom. Selling the house? Just like that? Mom, what about us? What about me? Her eyes darted between her siblings, pleading for alliance, for the acknowledgement she craved like breath in the stale room. But beneath the anxiety, there was that shadow flicker. Manipulation coiled tight, ready to tug at heartstrings if words alone failed, a subtle snare. Ethan stared at the ruined tablecloth, his knuckles whitening around the fork's handle, grip tightening. Peace. He needed to keep the peace, to smooth the edges before they cut too deep, drawing blood. But Lily's announcement clawed at him, a betrayal that echoed the years of quiet sacrifices he'd made, only to be overlooked, invisible. The house wasn't just bricks. It was the fragile web holding them together, and now she was unraveling it without a glance back, threads snapping. Resentment bubbled low in his chest, unspoken, pressing against his ribs until he couldn't breathe it down, suffocating. Maya watched him, her detachment cracking just enough to let loneliness seep in, cold and insidious. She saw the weight on his shoulders, mirrored her own urge to flee, but said nothing, words trapped. The silence stretched, contemplative and cruel, each second piling on the disappointment like dust in an unused room, settling heavy. Clara leaned forward, her chair creaking under the shift, protesting. "Ethan, say something. We can't just let her do this." He exhaled sharply, the sound ragged in the oppressive quiet, tearing through. "I'm done," he muttered, voice low and final, eyes fixed on the table as if the words were etched there, permanent. No more calls. No more pretending this family's worth the effort. She's cut us loose. Fine. I'll cut her off too. The decision landed like a door slamming shut, irreversible, the air thickening with the echo of it, reverberating. His fear of confrontation twisted into this passive strike, aggressive in its silence, leaving the wound to fester, open and raw. Clara's face crumpled, tears welling in the corners of her eyes, her neediness turning to a gasp of abandonment, sharp intake. "You can't mean that. Ethan, please, we're all we've got." She reached for his arm, fingers trembling not from fear, but from the desperate bid to pull him back, to make him see her, insistent touch. Maya rose then, slow and deliberate, her chair tipping back with a soft thud that echoed. Loneliness wrapped around her like a shroud, the family's fractures too deep to mend, irreparable. She slipped toward the kitchen doorway, not looking back, the weight of their whispers chasing her, accusations unspoken, hanging heavy, pressing down until sadness bloomed in her chest, cold and unrelenting, a dark flower. Ethan didn't move, his fork still clutched, the gravy's chill seeping into his skin as the room's melancholy deepened. Each breath a reminder of what they'd lost, before it was even gone, irrevocable. The clatter echoed long after the gravy's stain had seeped into the cloth, a prelude to the unraveling that night, ominous. Hours dragged in the heavy air of the old house, where shadows clung to the walls like unspoken grievances, tenacious. Ethan paced the dim hallway, his anger a smoldering coal in his chest, glowing faintly, while Maya retreated to her room, the loneliness wrapping tighter around her solitude, constricting. By midnight, the fragile threads of their bond frayed further, drawing them inexorably toward the storm of confrontation that awaited in the shadowed living room, brewing. "Why won't they just look at me?" Clara's fork scraped the plate's edge, a shrill whisper cutting through the gravy's cooling slickness, grating. The salt shaker sat untouched in her grip, its glass facets catching the dim chandelier light like fractured promises, glinting mockingly. Ethan's spill spread, soaking into the linen with a faint, acrid tang of overcooked meat and regret, pervasive. Ethan cleared his throat, voice muffled as if swallowed by the room's pressing walls, confining. "Sorry," slippery fingers. He dabbed at the mess with his napkin, movements deliberate, eyes fixed on the stain. Anything to sidestep the storm brewing in Lily's lingering silence from earlier. Avoidance, his refuge. Peace. He needed to stitch this back together, smooth the edges before they frayed completely, unraveling. Maya pushed her chair back an inch, the legs whispering against the hardwood, like a withheld confession. Soft, but insistent. The congealed potatoes on her plate gleamed dully, mirroring the isolation coiling in her chest, reflective void. She wanted out, away from this table's gravitational pull, the way it dragged her back into their shared voids, inescapable. But her feet stayed planted, traitors to her resolve, rooted. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears, each beat a plea, urgent. "You always do that," she said, voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. The words tumbled out, unbidden, her hand finally releasing the salt to clench the table's edge. Wood grain bit into her palm, grounding the surge rising inside, raw. "Apologize for everything except what's real. Like we're all just ghosts here," she added, the accusation hanging heavy. Ethan's napkin paused mid-wipe. He glanced up, brows knitting in that practiced evasion. A mask. "Clara, not now. Dinner's almost—" "No!" The syllable exploded from her, sharp and unyielding, gravy forgotten in the heat. Her chair scraped louder as she leaned forward, face flushed under the chandelier's unforgiving glow, illuminating flaws. The air thickened with the scent of cooling fat and unspoken years, neglected birthdays, half-hearted calls, the slow erosion of what family meant, wearing away like stone. "Not now? When then? When we're all buried and it doesn't matter anymore?" she demanded, voice rising in the contemplative pause. Maya's fork clinked against porcelain, abandoned with finality. She met Clara's gaze for the first time that evening, her own eyes hardening like polished stone, unyielding. Loneliness clawed at her ribs, but anger surged hotter, a shield against the pull, defensive. "What do you want from us, Clara? Blood? We're not your puppets." Her voice sliced low, laced with the bitterness of too many escapes attempted, too few successful. Obligations suffocated. This was just another noose tightening, around her neck. Ethan's hands flattened on the table, knuckles paling under the strain. Conflict loomed, a shadow he couldn't outrun, encroaching. "Stop, both of you. This isn't helping." But his tone wavered, passive-aggressive edges creeping in. The unspoken accusation that they were the ones unraveling him, thread by thread. Clara's breath hitched, tears scalding her cheeks, but fury burned brighter than vulnerability, consuming. She slammed her palm down, the impact jolting the silverware into a chaotic rattle, discordant. "Helping? You've never helped. You pretend we're fine, Ethan. Swallow it all to keep your precious peace. And you, Maya, you run. Leave us choking on the dust." Her voice broke then, raw exposure cracking the mask, vulnerable. Neglect poured out. The empty holidays, the ignored cries for more than indifference, a torrent. "I just wanted us, not this hollow nothing," she confessed, the words dissolving into the air. Maya recoiled, chair tipping back with a thud that echoed. Anger twisted her features, masking the ache Clara's words unearthed. Her own buried longing, starved by independence's lie, deceptive. "You think you're the only one hurting? We all rot here alone because of you, clinging, demanding what we can't give," she retorted, voice laced with dark truth. Ethan rose halfway, then sank back, trapped in the web. The room's oppression pressed in, walls echoing their fractures, amplifying. Silence fell, heavier than before. Relationships splintering like the spilled gravy's dark veins, spreading. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobs muffled, the facade shattered completely. No one moved to comfort her. Anger lingered, a bitter fog, underscoring the loneliness that bound them tighter than love ever had, an iron chain. The remnants of that dinner clung like a pall, the acrid stain of regret seeping into the house's very bones, permanent. Days blurred in heavy silence, meals untouched, nights fractured by restless shadows, isolation wrapping each sibling in its suffocating folds, constricting breath. Thoughts circled endlessly, decisions gnawing like unseen wounds, persistent. 3 days later, as dawn's feeble light pierced the oppressive gloom, they rose without words, shoulders bowed under the weight of fractured bonds, stepping into the chill air toward an uncertain horizon, vast and foreboding. That's when Clara realized the silence wasn't empty. It was a grave, and they were all buried alive in it, entombed. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight into the hollow hours, its hands slicing through the dim glow of the bulb above the sink, merciless. She stood there, arms wrapped around her middle, the chill from the linoleum seeping through her socks like forgotten apologies, numbing. Ethan's spill from dinner had dried into a crusty stain on the tablecloth, flaking under her fingernail as she traced it absent-mindedly. A tactile reminder. Maya had vanished upstairs hours ago, her footsteps fading like echoes in a canyon, leaving Clara alone with the weight of what hadn't been said, crushing. Ethan lingered in the doorway to the hall, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the floorboards, distorted. He wanted to fix this, confront the rot eating at their edges, but the words stuck in his throat, tangled in the fear of what upheaval might unearth, buried deep. "We should clean up," he muttered, voice low, more command than offer, authoritative yet hollow. His hands flexed at his sides, itching to scrub away the mess, to restore some order without facing the chaos beneath, superficial. Clara's laugh came sharp, brittle, shattering the quiet like glass underfoot, splintering. "Clean up? That's your answer?" She spun toward him, eyes red-rimmed from tears she hadn't let fall yet, glistening. The salt from dinner still clung to her skin, gritty against her palms, abrasive. All those years of pretending it didn't matter, the skipped birthdays, the half-hearted calls, the way Maya's independence carved walls no one could scale, impenetrable. It festered inside her now, a wound splitting open, bleeding. "You spill your life everywhere and just wipe it away? What about us? What about me?" she demanded, voice rising in the stillness. Ethan froze, his drive to protect the family twisting into something sharper, passive-aggressive in its retreat, defensive. "Not now, Clara. It's late." But his voice cracked, betraying the responsibility gnawing at him, the avoidance that had let neglect bloom unchecked, wild and thorny. Upstairs, Maya heard the voices rise and fall. Her body curled under the thin blanket, the fabric rough against her cheek, irritating. She yearned for this connection, the kind that didn't demand she surrender her edges. But the fear of being trapped in their needs kept her still, paralyzed. Loneliness wrapped around her like the pre-dawn chill drafting through the cracked window. A reminder that independence was just another word for alone, echoing. By the time the first gray light filtered through the curtains, they moved like ghosts, ethereal. Clara's breakdown had ebbed into exhausted sobs, her face streaked with the salt of unspoken pleas, the facade of indifference crumbling into raw need, exposed. Ethan packed a small bag by the door, his movements deliberate, avoiding her gaze. Confrontation averted, but the upheaval simmered beneath, bubbling. Maya descended the stairs in silence, her footsteps soft, conflicted eyes darting between them, balancing the pool of family against the suffocation it promised, a tightrope. They stepped out into the paling dawn, the front door clicking shut behind them with finality, a lock turning. The gravel crunched underfoot, each step pulling them farther from the house that had cradled their fractures. Reluctant cradle. No words passed. Only the weight of decisions hung between them. Clara's longing exposed. Ethan's avoidance a silent barrier. Maya's yearning masked by distance. The world stretched empty ahead, isolation threading through the spaces they left unfilled, an uncertain future dawning cold and vast, unforgiving. 3 days crawled by in the family's shadowed limbo, each hour a heavier stone pressing down on the unspoken rift, accumulating. Clara's midnight vigil had dissolved into rote routines, meals untouched, conversations stifled, leaving the house a mausoleum of sighs and averted eyes, tomb-like. Loneliness coiled tighter, an invisible shroud, until one gray afternoon, Mark sifted through the mail, his fingers hesitating over an envelope that promised to unearth the buried ache. Ominous. Unease stirred, a faint tremor in the oppressive quiet, vibrating. The envelope's crisp edge sliced into Ethan's palm like a forgotten promise, sharp. It yanked him back. Father's voice, gravel rough over the dinner table, reading aloud from a similar letter 10 years gone, the one that promised therapy would stitch their family whole. But it hadn't. The words had dissolved into shouts, then silence, leaving only the echo of chairs scraping away, abandoned. 3 days had clawed by since the kitchen standoff, that midnight grave of unspoken accusations, where Clara had stood frozen, arms barricading her chest against the cold floor's bite, defensive. Now, in the dim afternoon light filtering through the living room blinds, Ethan sat on the sagging couch, the letter from the family therapist unopened in his lap, heavy. Maya paced the threadbare rug nearby, her footsteps measured, each one a deliberate anchor against the pull of something deeper, insistent. Clara hovered by the window, fingers twisting the cord of the blinds, her gaze fixed on the empty street outside as if answers might drive up unannounced, illusory. He tore it open, the paper whispering accusations, soft yet damning. Urgent recommendation for group session, it began, to address unresolved trauma and emotional distance. The words blurred, heavy with the therapist's clinical pity, detached. Ethan's throat tightened, not from fear of confrontation, though that gnawed at him, but from the raw certainty that this would force them all to dig up the rot they'd buried under layers of indifference. Unearthed. Maya stopped pacing, her eyes sharpening on the page, piercing. Who sent that? Her voice carried that conflicted edge, independence warring with the ache for something real, unburdened by the family's endless obligations, internal battle. She leaned in, close enough for Ethan to catch the faint lavender of her soap, a scent that once meant safety, but now just underscored the distance, ironic. Some therapist says we need to talk, properly. Ethan's words came out clipped, his avoidance cracking under the weight, fracturing. He passed the letter to Clara, who snatched it with hands that betrayed a subtle shake, not trembling, but insistent, like a pulse, quickening toward fracture, accelerating. She scanned the lines, her frustration blooming into something sharper, her fear of being unloved, twisting the paper in her grip, crumpling. This? Now? After everything? The words escaped in a rush, laced with the manipulative lilt she wielded like a shield, but today it faltered, weakening. Her eyes, usually quick to deflect with a quip or a tear, welled without strategy, genuine. The longing hit her then, unmasked. The neglect that had festered since childhood, when their parents' absences left them orbiting emptiness, void. We can't keep pretending it's fine. I can't. Every night, that silence. It's killing me. And you both just let it, she said, voice breaking in the contemplative hush. The room pressed in, the air thick with the musty scent of old bookshelves and the faint, acrid tang of yesterday's coffee gone cold on the side table. Stagnant. Maya reached out, hesitated, her hand hovering before dropping to her side. Yearning clashing with the terror of being trapped again in their needs, conflicted. Ethan shifted, passive aggression bubbling as he muttered, "We tried talking. Look where it got us." But his voice broke, responsibility dragging him toward the edge he dreaded. Precipice. Clara sank to the floor, knees buckling under the vulnerability she'd armored against for years, collapsing. Sobs tore free, jagged and unfiltered, exposing the hollow core. The sister who craved connection, but feared its cost. The one who'd manipulated glances and words to fill the void, now stripped bare, raw. I just want us, not this grave we live in. The confession hung, a raw wound pulsing in the oppressive quiet, unease threading through them all like invisible wire, tight, unyielding, binding their fractures closer, even as it threatened to snap. Taut. Years slipped by like shadows in the dim corners of Ethan's mind, the envelope's sting a persistent ache that echoed through fractured lives, lingering. In the oppressive hush of another evening, doubt coiled tighter around Mark's chest, loneliness a heavy fog that blurred the edges of resolve, disorienting. His fingers hovered over the screen, the ghosts of unspoken grudges whispering suspicions, yet the pull of mending, or at least confronting, their unraveling bond grew insistent, drawing him toward the fragile thread of outreach, tenuous. The envelope's wax seal cracked under Ethan's thumb, releasing a faint, musty scent of aged paper and unspoken regrets, evocative. He stared at the elegant script inside, Dr. Harlan's invitation to a family session, the same therapist who'd failed them a decade ago, haunting. His pulse thudded dully in his ears, each beat a reminder of the years he'd let slide by, avoiding the fractures in their bond like cracks in thin ice, precarious. He dialed Clara first, the phone's cool plastic pressing into his palm like an accusation, cold. It rang twice before her voice cut through, sharp and edged with the static of distance, crackling. "Ethan, this better not be about borrowing money again." "It's not," he hesitated, the words sticking in his throat, heavy as the guilt he'd buried under work deadlines and solitary evenings, waited. "I got a letter. From the old therapist. Dad's pushing for us to go back. Together. All three of us." Silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on her end. A city's indifferent pulse, mechanical. Clara laughed, but it was brittle, like glass under strain, fracturing. "Together? Now? After what, 15 years of radio silence? What's the angle, Ethan? You suddenly care about family health?" He winced, her suspicion coiling around him like smoke from a dying fire, choking. Clara's drive for genuine connections warred with her shadow, that manipulative pull toward attention, and he could hear it now, the frustration lacing her tone, conflicted, as if testing him for cracks, probing. "No angle," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice, despite the fear gnawing at his gut, the dread of confrontation ripping open old wounds, tearing. "We've been ghosts to each other. No calls, no support. It's left scars we pretend aren't there. This could fix that." She exhaled sharply, the sound carrying the weight of her own loneliness, masked by years of chasing fleeting admirers, elusive. "Fix it? You think sitting in some stuffy office will erase how you vanished when Mom left? Or how I had to beg for scraps of your time?" Her words hung, probing, suspicious of his motives. Was this responsibility? Or just another way to dodge the real mess? Evasive. Before he could respond, the line beeped, Maya joining the call, her breath catching audibly, as if she'd been waiting for this fracture to surface, anticipatory. "What's going on?" Maya's voice was quieter, laced with that yearning conflict, her independence a shield against the suffocation of family ties, armored. But Ethan heard the undercurrent, the deep-seated loneliness she buried under solo travels and unanswered texts, hidden depths. "Ethan wants us in therapy," Clara snapped, suspicion now a shared toxin, thickening the air between them, even across the miles, pervasive. "Like it's that easy." Maya paused, the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain suggesting she was stirring tea, a solitary ritual in her sparse apartment, intimate. "Therapy? With you two?" Her tone dipped into melancholy, oppressive in its honesty, evoking the invisible scars of their abandonment. Nights alone after Dad's breakdowns, siblings drifting like shadows without anchors, lost. "I get the idea. We've all been running. But why now? What's really behind this, Ethan? You avoiding something bigger?" His avoidance twisted inward, passive-aggressive defensiveness bubbling up, surfacing. "Because ignoring it hasn't worked. Look at us, frustrated, forgotten, yearning for what we never had. If we don't face it, these scars just fester." The truth exposed itself in fragments, their voices overlapping in contemplative rhythm. Clara's frustrated barbs, Maya's hesitant probes, his own torn admissions, layered. Suspicion lingered, a melancholic fog, as they circled the invitation, reluctant, yet drawn by the hollow ache of loneliness, the oppressive weight of bonds frayed but not severed, enduring. By the call's end, agreement hung tentative, a fragile thread in the dim. Ethan pocketed the envelope, its edges now softened, but the scars remained, raw and real, throbbing. Days blurred into a suffocating veil, the invitation's weight anchoring Ethan's every restless night, burdensome. Fear gnawed at the edges of his solitude, a melancholic fog that thickened with each dawning hour, whispering of fractured silences and the siblings' shadowed arrivals, foreboding. In the oppressive hush of morning, he dressed in shadows, the drive to Dr. Harlan's office a slow unraveling of resolve, deliberate. Loneliness carved deeper hollows in his chest as the building loomed like an unyielding confessor, imposing. The echo of footsteps that never followed. In the waiting room's stale hush, Ethan sat alone at first, the plastic chair's creak underscoring the void where casual chatter should have lingered from past visits. Empty. No hurried apologies from late arrivals, no shared glances of reluctant solidarity. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner, cycling emptiness, monotonous. Maya slipped in next, her coat draped over one arm like a shield she couldn't quite drop, protective. She nodded at Ethan, eyes skimming the faded magazines on the side table. Pages yellowed, topics irrelevant to the fractures they carried, outdated. "You're early," she said, voice threading the silence without warmth, neutral. She settled across from him, legs crossed, fingers tracing the armrest's worn edge, as if mapping an escape route, instinctive. Independence had always been her armor, but today it felt thin, stretched over the ache of years unspoken, vulnerable. Clara burst through the door minutes later, heels clicking sharp against the linoleum, a whirlwind of perfume and unresolved fury. Disruptive. She dropped her bag with a thud that rattled the water cooler, its plastic bubbles rising mockingly in the quiet, bubbling. "Traffic," she muttered, though no one asked, excuse hanging. Her gaze darted between them, seeking anchors that weren't there, searching. Frustration simmered beneath her smile, the kind that twisted genuine pleas into barbs, edged. Dr. Harlan's door opened precisely at 3, the therapist's face a mask of practiced empathy, unchanged from a decade ago, familiar yet distant. "Come in," he said, gesturing to the circle of armchairs inside, soft leather, arranged too intimately for their guarded postures, intrusive. The room smelled of chamomile tea long gone cold, mingled with the faint metallic tang of old radiator vents, stale. No windows to the world outside, just walls papered in muted beige, closing in like forgotten promises. Confining. They filed in, Ethan taking the seat farthest from the center, his hands clasped to still their urge to retreat, restrained. Maya perched on the edge of hers, back straight, as if ready to bolt towards some solitary horizon, poised. Clara claimed the spot nearest Harlan, leaning forward, her drive for connection pulling her into the fray, even as fear of invisibility gnawed at her edges, conflicting. The session began with Harlan's gentle probes, questions about the invitation, the years since, probing. Ethan spoke first, voice measured, driven by that fragile resolve to mend what avoidance had broken, tentative. We thought this failed last time, but ignoring it, it's poisoned everything. His words hung, exposing the scar of their mother's abandonment, her sudden departure after the divorce, leaving them to navigate grief and isolation. No calls, no letters, just silence that echoed through holidays and milestones, resounding. Maya shifted, her yearning clashing with the weight of obligation, internal. She chose herself, left us to figure it out alone. And we did, mostly. But her tone cracked, revealing the loneliness masked by her self-reliance, the invisible wounds that made every relationship feel provisional, fragile. Clara's laugh cut sharp, manipulative edges glinting in the light. Figure it out? You mean pretend it didn't happen? She forgot us, Ethan. Just like you'll forget this if we don't make it hurt. Her fear spilled out, being unloved, erased, fueling the outburst, explosive. I tried calling her once, years ago. Voicemail. Always voicemail. And you two? You buried it. Left me screaming into the nothing. Ethan's restraint fractured, passive aggression surging, unchecked. Screaming? You mean the tantrums that pushed us further away? We were kids, Clara. Surviving. Responsibility warred with his dread of this upheaval, the room's oppression thickening as voices overlapped, accusations flying like shards, cutting. Maya interjected, voice rising in conflicted plea. Urgent. Stop. This is why we don't talk. Fear of this mess. But it's already scarred us. My jobs, my failed tries at anything real. Because who trusts when family's a ghost? Harlan interceded softly, but the damage bloomed, fear uncoiling in their eyes, the terror of truths laid bare, of bonds too frayed to hold against the abandonment's long shadow, looming. The session dragged on, contemplative pauses stretching into abysses, each sibling adrift in the melancholic weight of what they'd lost, and what they might never reclaim, irretrievable. Hours blurred into a heavy dusk as Ethan left the clinic, the weight of unspoken diagnoses pressing like fog against his ribs, enveloping. At home, the dim kitchen light cast long shadows over the cluttered table, where Lily waited, her silhouette rigid with unspoken accusations, tense. The air thickened with the residue of their shared silences, regrets coiling unseen beneath the surface, insidious, drawing them inexorably toward the fracture that would unearth buried pains, inevitable. Outside, the muffled wail of an ambulance slicing through the parking lot asphalt. Inside, Clara's voice, a jagged whisper cutting the waiting room's fluorescent drone, harsh. She paced the scuffed linoleum, her sneakers squeaking against the floor like accusations unspoken for years, grating. Maya perched on the edge of a chair, arms crossed tight over her chest, the fabric of her sweater bunching under her fingers, tense. Ethan slouched beside her, staring at the vending machine's glow. Its hum, a futile companion to the silence he'd always preferred. Mechanical. You think this is just about today? Clara snapped, halting mid-stride. Her eyes, red-rimmed from unshed tears, flicked between them, searching. Mom's been unraveling for decades, and we've all pretended it was fine. No calls, no check-ins, just this void we built around her. Maya's breath hitched, the sterile scent of antiseptic clinging to her throat like regret already forming, choking. She wanted to bolt, to reclaim the solitude of her apartment where connections didn't demand so much. Refuge. But here, in this room that pressed in with its beige walls and faded posters promising hope, escape felt like another abandonment. Ironic. Clara, stop. We're here now, aren't we? That's something. Ethan shifted, the chair groaning under him, protesting. She sank into a chair opposite them, her hands twisting in her lap. The manipulation she wielded for attention dissolving into something uglier. Truth, unvarnished. It's not pushing, it's illness. Mom's been fighting depression since before we were born. Pills that didn't work, nights she locked herself in the bathroom sobbing. I found her journals last year when I finally visited. She wrote about us, how our silence made her feel invisible, how she inherited it from Grandma, this black wave that swallows everything. We didn't just drift, we let it drown her. And now it's in us too, these scars we carry, pretending they're not there. The words landed like blows, heavy with the weight of years unshared, impacting. Ethan's drumming stopped, his face paling as responsibility crashed against his fear of upheaval, colliding. He saw it then, his passive barbs, the unanswered texts, all feeding the family's quiet decay, nourishing rot. Regret bloomed in his chest, sharp and unrelenting. A loneliness that mirrored the empty chairs around them, vacant. Maya pressed a hand to her mouth, tasting salt from